you say the government would have had less political grief if it had set up a Royal Commission 2 years ago. You're right. You're right about that.
He relentlessly attacked Labor for wanting a Royal Commission.
Whichever way you want to analyse it, you can't live your life backwards.
Scandal after scandal. 2 years ago, I said enough is enough.
I made the call and I take responsibility.
He fought Labor tooth and nail against having a Royal Commission.
It was the Prime Minister himself who put the issue of misbehaviour in the banking industry on the political agenda.
We expect our bankers to have higher standards. We expect them always rigorously to put their customers' interests first.
2 years ago, he surprised many with a lecture to the industry at a lunch to celebrate Westpac's 199th birthday.
Our bankers have not always treated their customers as they should.
If Malcolm Turnbull had hoped to tap into growing public anger toward the banks, the plan soon backfired. 2 days later, Labor upped the ante.
Today I say enough is enough. This string of scandals has to stop. And if Mr Turnbull can't or won't have a Royal Commission into the banking and financial services sector, an incoming Labor government will.
For the next year and a half, the government would continue to insist a Royal Commission was a waste of time and money.
This is all about pursuing his crass populism and undermining, Mr Speaker, an institution that is critical to our economy.
It will go on for years, it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it will not tell us anything new.
And yet the scandals kept growing.
Commonwealth Bank now stands accused of nearly 54,000 breaches of its
Bank
reporting.
CEO Ian Narev is embroiled in another crisis.
Commonwealth does everything it can to avoid paying.
But the worse the publicity for the banks, the bigger their profits.
It unveils a record profit.
Westpac reported a 3% increase in half-year profit.
By the end of 2016, the government had decided to have its own inquiry. Bosses were hauled to Canberra and publicly flayed.
I've said before how sorry I am for the pain that we've caused them.
I have apologised and do so again.
And for that I apologise.
And we apologise for this.
Those apologies only increased calls from within the coalition for a Royal Commission.
At a Senate inquiry back in 2014, we recommended a Royal Commission then. We knew there were wrongdoings in the financial planning arm of many of the institutions.
Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison insisted they were fixing the problems, beefing up budgets and powers for regulators.
The advice they were getting is that ASIC and Austrac and APRA were actually having some pretty big wins against the banks.
Then the Treasurer hit the banks with this in the 2017 budget.
Tonight, I also announce a new 6 basis point levy on the big banks' liabilities starting on July 1.
But pressure continued to mount.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
And the Prime Minister continued to dig in.
There is not going to be a banking Royal Commission.
A week later, he gave in.
The only way we can give all Australians a greater degree of assurance about the financial system is through a Royal Commission into misconduct into the financial services industry.
Fast forward and the revelations from the Royal Commission have been breathtaking. Fees charged for services never provided, dead clients hit with still more fees, and most damning, AMP's admission it deliberately and repeatedly lied to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission.
So we're seeing things that I knew nothing about. We hadn't heard about them at our parliamentary inquiries, our Senate inquiries. New evidence coming out, and I'm sure there'll be more to come out in the future as well.
Nationals backbencher John Wacker Williams spent years campaigning for a Royal Commission after hearing story after story of misbehaviour in the banking industry.
Well, the Prime Minister said politically he should have had it earlier. It's not for me to speak for the Prime Minister, but I'm just glad it's here now.
One former Liberal leader says both sides of politics are guilty of letting problems run for too long without being fixed.
The issues are broken and they've let them run. In many cases, I hope they'll go away. They don't seem to have any issues management strategy, and this is an example.
But John Hewson doesn't think the political brouhaha over the timing of the Royal Commission is going to make an impact on voters.
Well, I don't know whether an apology matters. I mean, they've just as much said that in terms of saying, you know, they got it wrong or they didn't get it early enough or they didn't see the significance of it. But, you know, people are more interested in substantive responses, not in point scoring.
Whether he called it late or not, the Royal Commission is the Prime Minister's baby now. It's early days and the revelations have already been shocking. Last week, the government announced still more tough penalties for corporate wrongdoing. But with at least 6 months of hearings ahead, Pressure's already building to go further.
There'll have to be radical change. Just increasing the fines and resourcing ASIC more is not enough.
Former competition czar Alan Fell says the faith the government put in regulators to fix problems was misplaced.
ASIC has been an ineffective regulator, and that's been the case for 20 years or more. The banks do not have a fear of ASIC. It is a manageable institution from their point of view.
And he says it's time banks were forced to divest their troublesome financial advice operations and return to their core businesses.
We need to separate the creation of financial products from the offering of so-called independent, impartial advice by the banks and financial institutions, which is not, in fact, impartial or unbiased.
When you have people, planners working for the banks, selling the bank's product, of course they're biased. And I think financial advisors should be totally independent from any institution. I'd like to see that proceed after the Royal Commission if it is recommended.
Others say the big problem lies elsewhere. One respected former senior banker told 730 much of the issue lies at the board level. Directors and chairs guilty of failing to create a proper culture of corporate governance. But there's precious little the government can do about that, besides which it has more immediate concerns. The budget's a fortnight away and it's still trying to get a deal to pass its corporate tax cuts. The Royal Commission's not helping negotiations with the crossbench, and Labor's continuing to fan the flames of discontent.
If he was fair dinkum about his apology, absolutely now drop the corporate tax cuts to big banks,